Welcome to an introduction of Zen as my chair falls apart. Zen, a variety of Buddhism, now flourishes in Japan and has infused richness into almost all of Japan's cultural life. Before it took root in Japan in the 12th century, it had been for 500 years one of the great philosophical religious movements in China. Zen has been described as a mystical pantheism, a system of metaphysics taught with riddles and bows, a sort of existentialist cult, a blandly not to be explained higher way of daily life. Zen is something of all of these, but basically it is a variety of Buddhism. Buddhism originated in India about 500 BC with the prince Siddhartha Gautama, who gave up his family and his sheltered life, which he discovered could not protect him from old age, illness, unhappiness, and death, to seek a higher kind of life. After seeking wisdom from others and failing to find it, he had his own revelation of a higher life. This came as he meditated under the Bodhi tree. Thereafter, he taught the truth that he had learned, and around him gathered a group of followers that grew into a monolithic order still powerful in much of the Orient. He was known to his followers as the Buddha, the Enlightened One. Buddha taught that there is an eternal, endless universe of absolute being of which we are temporarily incarnations. As such, we are subject to delusions and temptations, pain and trouble, illness and death. But by studying to find wisdom, living to do good, and concentrating to achieve control over mind and body, we can escape from the dominance of the physical world, and we can transmit a good inheritance of karma to our later incarnations. Karma has been defined as that moral kernel of any being which survives death and continues in transmigration. Buddha taught that a succession of beings, each improving its common inheritance of karma, can eventually rise to an existence entirely free of this world, the state of nirvana. Buddha himself is said to have achieved nirvana at his death, that is, permanent enlightenment in a state free from rebirth. 1,000 years after Buddha, a monk from India came to China with a modified Buddhism that was destined to become widely practiced in China and eventually in Japan under the name Zen. This traveler was called Bodhidharma and is believed to have come to China in 520 AD. Bodhi means enlightenment. Dharma means truthful way. Following Bodhidharma, Zen was transmitted through a body of monks and a series of patriarchs, each patriarch leaving his robe and begging bowl to his chosen successor as a badge of office. The sixth patriarch was a lowly monk who was not a scholar. His selection confirmed the fact that by this time Zen had become a way of life for the simple as well as for the studious devotee. This was about 150 years after Bodhidharma. Zen is, without being worldly, a discipline more suited than classic Buddhism to worldly men seeking a higher spiritual experience. It neglects karma, reincarnation, and nirvana, but it still demands meditation, concentration, and physical discipline. Its unique teaching is that enlightenment may come to dedicated layman, and that this enlightenment may occur suddenly and intuitively, not necessarily requiring years of study and concentration. The achieving of enlightenment in Zen is not at all a rational or methodical process. It is completely non-rational, unexplainable, and intuitive. The Zen training in concentration, in the characteristic cross-legged position, and the Zen teaching of koans, non-logical riddles and stories, are designed to put the student in a state where he or she can abandon logic and make the leap upward into enlightenment. In Japanese, the state of enlightenment is called Satori. In Satori, we are able to look beyond our immediate world into the universe of original, eternal, absolute being, often called the Great Emptiness, which was before our world was formed and will be after it disappears. In this condition, we lose our sense of self and know ourselves to be part of the great oneness of all, knowing ourselves be part of absolute being. Our ego and our problems of ego, sin, pain, poverty, fear, all dissolve. This is salvation in Zen terms. Having reached the state of Satori, we become aware that everything in all this world about us, all other living and non-living things, even our lowest animal functions, are part of absolute being and are thus essentially holy. Mountains and rocks, trees and grass blades, elephants and microbes all share equally in the eternal. This awareness permits us to go about our daily life with a new freedom, a new sureness, a new sense of doing the work of absolute being, even in the smallest or dirtiest task of the present life. It is this sense also that makes the tea ceremony in Japan a ritual of devotion that makes a 17-syllable haiku poem a universal statement of faith, that makes a quick brush drawing a gesture of piety in eternity. Beyond this awareness that all things are part of absolute being and share its holiness comes a sense of the interpenetration of all things. Each of us is the apex of a cone of past ancestors and the beliefs, acts, and events which determined them. Each of us also is a point from which a new cone of individuals and events will arise, each in some part a product of what we are. We are all a part of absolute being, and we are all a part of each other. This concept has been described in the allegory of Indra's net. There is an endless net of threads throughout the universe. The horizontal threads are in space. The vertical threads are in time. At every crossing of threads is an individual, and every individual is a crystal bead. The great light of absolute being illuminates and penetrates every crystal bead, but also every crystal bead reflects not only the light from every other crystal in the net, but also every reflection of every reflection throughout the universe. Thus, we learn that we live in all other beings, all other things, and that they live in us. Our lives are richer and more filled with obligations than we ever knew before. The following stories are from the annals of Zen, tales of past masters and patriarchs, parables used in teaching, and koans used in freeing the mind from logic. They cannot by themselves make you a participant in the Zen experience, but they can give you pleasure as allegories and antidotes and can give some savor of the intensity, spirituality, and tenacity of Zen practitioners over the past 1,000 years and more. The koan is a riddle without a logical answer. To the casual reader, some of these riddles and the conversations which contain them will seem utter nonsense, but they have been preserved and reverbed for centuries by serious men, so we must look deeper. The same reason we cannot dismiss as equal nonsense the beatings given by masters to pupils who make reasonable answers, or the intentionally idiotic commentaries written by the master Mumon on famous koans. The purpose of the koans, of the beatings of the commentaries, is to break the mind of logic. What the master wants of the pupil is not understanding in any usual sense. He wants to burst the bag and drive the pupil with whole-souled precipitation into the great emptiness. the great stillness, where all things stand without being touchable, where all sounds are without being heard. The master Nanin had a visitor who came to inquire about Zen. But instead of listening, the visitor kept talking about his own ideas. After a while, Nanin served tea. He poured tea into his cup's visitor. He poured tea into his visitor's cup until it was full. Then he kept on pouring. Finally, the visitor could not restrain himself. "Don't you see it's full?" he said. "You can't get any more in." "Just so," replied Nanin, stopping at last. "And like this cup, you are filled with your own ideas. How can you expect me to give you Zen unless you offer me an empty cup?"